This is just an excerpt from a full episode. If you enjoyed what you hear here, go check out other full episodes, either on YouTube or as part of the podcast feed. Enjoy! And finally, citizenship news. Australia. The land so down under, its human rights violations fly under the radar. We'll be making adjustments to the citizenship test, adding new questions which will be included on Australian citizenship tests from November 15. These questions will require potential citizens to understand and commit to our values like freedom of speech, mutual respect, equality of opportunity, the importance of democracy, and the rule of law. According to a statement put out by Alan Tudge, a member for the House of Representatives who thinks every house should represent him more faithfully. And so we have two major changes coming up. First, a new citizenship test with exciting new questions. The questions will attempt to quiz potential citizens on Australian values, because everyone enjoys a quiz. Speaking of quizzes, get tickets now to my news quiz show in the upcoming Melbourne Fringe, just for funny. Attendance may or may not be mandatory under new citizenship laws. We'll have to wait and see, but best be cautious and book now. We added some of our own questions here. See if you can decipher which ones are real and which ones are weird news questions in the first ever Weird News Citizenship Test. Why is it important that all Australian citizens vote to elect the state and federal parliament exclusively from the coalition? Should people in Australia make an effort to learn English? Does this include Pauline Hanson? In Australia, can you encourage violence against a person or group of people if you have been insulted? Is there an exception for police? Should people tolerate one another where they find that they disagree? Is there an exception for the police? In Australia, are people free to choose who they marry and not marry unless they are gay? Oh, sorry, that was left over from the old citizenship test. Here we go. The new question is now, gay marriage is legal. Will people be free to choose to marry a dog? In Australia, is it acceptable for a husband to be violent towards his wife if she has disobeyed or disrespected him? Is there an exception for the police? Do you agree that men and women should be provided equality of opportunity when pursuing their goals and interests? Should the coalition be forced to abide by this ideal or continue its meritocracy charade? Should people's freedom of speech and freedom of expression be respected in Australia? Although these aren't the exact questions that will be on the test, they do give a good example of how they will look. Acting Immigration Minister Alan Tudge has been leading the charge to update the citizenship test and assess the incoming eligibility of potential new citizens. But given the emphasis on potential citizens to understand and commit to our values like freedom of speech, mutual respect, equality of opportunity, the importance of democracy and the rule of law, would Alan Tudge fit the criterion? Let's look back over the man who has tried to dismiss a senior judge's description of his criminal conduct, arguing it was merely commentary in the broader immigration dispute. Federal Court Justice Jeffrey Flick labelled Tudge's behaviour as acting like he was above the law. Here, we see Tudge refuting his claim.
I am the law.
Going on to explain, Tudge had failed to immediately release an Afghan man from immigration detention after he was granted a temporary protection visa, stating Tudge had intentionally and without lawful authority been responsible for depriving a person of his liberty, and said his conduct exposes him to both civil and potentially criminal sanctions. And Tudge's response to step down from his position in response to these claims was arguing the character assessment was made in commentary, and said that he would not be stepping down from his position, an argument that I will be taking to my next performance review, citing the case of Tudge versus Empathy. He has a history of this sort of stuff though. In 2017, the Australian Federal Police had to decide whether or not to investigate the then Human Services Minister Alan Tudge over the controversial disclosure of a welfare recipient's personal information to a journalist, because he thought it was legal to leak information. A staggering confession for a man who represents a party who has been ruthless on whistleblowers and actively changed the law to discourage them. Claimed that the now proven to be unlawful Centrelink Robodebt system was working just fine and did not believe it was flawed, which, to be fair to him, If the intention was to overcharge the poor and scrape back money you aren't owed, then yeah, it works brilliantly. He even claimed that the system was a success. Here, Ministers Greg Hunt, Michael Sukkar and Alan Tudge, also known as the Triangle of Contempt, avoided contempt charges after comments about weak terrorism sentencing in Victoria after apologising to court. And his department knew of the illegal sale of Medicare details on the dark web almost a fortnight before the illicit trade was exposed in a media report. And that was just 2017. I was let go from a job once for not being homewares material after 2 weeks. This guy is still in a job now, 3 years after he has been found to have done all of these things. So let's look at 2018. Here he is, making misleading statements about a number of skilled immigrants intending to settle in Sydney or Melbourne, despite a migration program report actually showing a decrease in the number of skilled migrants intending to live in New South Wales and Victoria. He was actually the instigator of the previous version of all this, the Permanent Residence Australian Values Test. And in response to vandalising a Captain Cook statue in 2018, he said, "These vandals are trashing our national heritage and it should be prosecuted." He told local radio station 3AW, "I want Australia Day to be a great, unifying day for our country. It has been for many decades now." I mean, to me, this seems to be a fun new activity that is unifying more and more Australians. But I guess that's just my opinion. On to 2019. Alan Tudge teamed up with Twiggy Forrest on the Cashless welfare card venture, which returned a profit of $5.1 million in the last financial year. Despite owning an apartment in Canberra, he claimed $27,192 in expenses for 97 nights in the capital. He boasted that he could claw back $1.9 billion in welfare fraud, despite knowing that there were a large number of errors. He continued to promote and defend the program, most likely because he knew it was a flawed system. This then led to over 2,000 deaths, subsequent to the issue of these debts. Alan Tudge approved the media release of the personal records of a suicide victim of robo-debt in a bid to bolster his department's side. Again. So, a relatively small number of fuck-ups in a single year for 2019. And now, even though 2020 is not finished, so there is time for him to add more this year, but so far, it was revealed that Tudge was warned 76 times that the robo-debt system was not enforceable. But you know the old saying, ignorance is trillions of dollars of unlawful bliss, as well as the previously mentioned criminal conduct. And that's everything he's done in 2020 so far. But it's been a busy few years for Alan Tudge. On top of all of this, there is now a controversial new English language requirement. A proposal so laced with dreadful irony, it can't be read in the one of 7,000 Indigenous Australian languages that are now in danger of dying out by the end of the century, because nobody outside of Indigenous community is encouraged to speak any of them. In regards to the proposal of the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, said, "I don't want to see people who come to Australia to be vulnerable. And if your English language skills are not strong or non-existent, then you will be more vulnerable in Australia." He of course said it after he locked the gates behind him after attending the daily head counts of Nauru and Manus. It's a tough job, but someone has to do it. Those refugees won't persecute themselves, The statement might not have been made by Tudge himself, but it is indicative of the proposals that he supports and the company that he keeps. If you were assessing this guy for Australian values, he would pass with flying colours. Seems more recently, Australian values include a mindless prejudice for those different to us, avoiding punishment, unless of course you're poor, and claiming that we're all in it together, despite the obviousness of the differences in treatment between the tax brackets. But if you were to assess him on his language ability, well, seems Tudge is really struggling with some very basic concepts. When you need to be told something 76 times and you still fail to comprehend the message, it strikes me as a distinct lack of comprehension skills. A lack of understanding of the ideas like criminality, privacy, theft, bullying, fraud. He needs to brush up on his English. Someone needs to get him a copy of the Macquarie Dictionary, Australia's Dictionary, and Worst Game Show Prize as seen on Letters and Numbers.